This video is to go through 16.4 work together. So we have 4 steps. The first step is credit balances, and it says use Superior Corporation's trial balance and financial statement in question assets to close the income statement accounts with credit balances on page 19 of the General Journal. So really what they're doing is that we have our 4 closing entries that we're going to be making, and we're going to be doing them in 4 separate steps. So the first one is closing those income statement accounts that have credit balances. What we're going to do is we are going to look at our adjusted trial balance, and we're going to scroll down until we find our income summary. Our income summary is really our cutoff point for our income statement account. So we are going to start and we are going to look at all of those credit accounts that come after income summary, and we are going to close those accounts. So I'm going to unpin this and move it kind of over here just so that I can see mine better. Okay, so our first one that we see that we are going to close is going to be our sales account. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to start with my date of December 31st. And since sales has a credit balance, we are going to close it with a debit. So I'm going to put in sales. I don't have a document number since this is a closing entry, and I'm going to debit that for $505,897.4. Oops. Okay, I'm going to continue making my way down, and I'm finding my next credit, which is purchases discount. So I'm going to list that. And to close that account, I will debit it for $737.71. Next one is going to be my purchases, returns, and allowances. I will debit for $1,196.01. Scroll down to see if we have any more credits. We have one more credit. So our interest income, we will close with a debit of $466.20. So those are our 4 income statement accounts that have credit balances that we are going to close with debits. Then we need to credit something. So we are going to credit our income summary account. We're going to add up. So get out your calculator. We're going to add those up. We should get 508,297.32. So this is my first closing entry. I'm going to grade step 1 and next step. My next step then, it says use Superior Corporation's trial balance and financial statements to close the income statement accounts with debit balances. So this is my second closing entry. I'm going to close all of my income statement accounts that have debit balances. Now, this is usually going to be a longer transaction because when we scroll down, again, we're going to find income summary. That's our cutoff. And then we are going to go from income summary down, so not including income summary, but incomes after income summary. Any account that has a debit, we are going to close with a credit. Now, when we look through, this is a lot of accounts. So let's go ahead and start it. I have December 31st as my date. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in my debit account. My debit account is going to be income summary. Now, I don't know how much we're going to debit income summary for yet, so I'm just going to leave that blank, and I'm going to start putting in my accounts that I need to credit. So again, I'm going to find income summary, everything after income summary. So we see sales discount. We are going to credit to close that for $1,318.55. Sales, returns, and allowances, a credit of $3,153.26. Purchases, a credit of $203. 881.01. Oops. Then we are jumping down. We have, now we get into our expense accounts, and usually this is what's going to be a little longer. And I'm actually going to pause the video here, and I'm just going to fill in all of my accounts that have credit or debit balances. I'm going to put those in as credits. You don't need to watch me do that. So I would suggest that you pause the video as well and put in all of your accounts. Okay, I have now put in all of my income statement accounts that have debit balances. I've put them in for my closing entry, and I have credited all of those accounts. Okay, so I would just double check with mine, make sure that you have all of your accounts. I would say that this is probably the most common area that we make a mistake. Sometimes when we are copying these numbers, we transpose numbers, we copy down the wrong number, we get lost and we skip an account. So really make sure that you are double checking your work. Next thing that we're going to do then is we are going to add up all of these credits, and that will give us then our debit for our income summary. So again, pause this video, make sure that you are adding up and that you get the same number that I do. Okay, I actually found two errors that I made. So I was copying my numbers down incorrectly. So this should be 0.03, and then this one should be 131,978.76. So really make sure that you're double checking there. I just went and showed you how easy it is to make a mistake. So we should get 429,376.63 as our total of these credits, and then that will be what we will debit to income summary. So we can grade step 2. And next step. Okay, so now we are going to make our third closing entry. Now remember, with our third closing entry, it really essentially is doing two things in one. One, we're going to close our income summary account. That also, actually, I should say it the other way around, is one, we're going to record our net income or our net loss, and then at that same time, it ends up closing then our income summary account. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to start with my date of December 31st. Now, here's what they do for us to show us. There's a couple different ways that we can look at this. And I would actually double check my work by doing this. Okay, when we look at our income summary, we say that we have a debit balance to our income summary. So I'm going to go ahead and put that into my calculator. So 5,771.89. Okay, now I see when I look at these adjusting or these closing entries, I see that I'm going to credit income summary. So if I have a debit balance and a credit, I'm going to subtract. So now I'm going to subtract 508,297.32. That's going to give me a negative number. Okay, and now I see that I have a debit. So now I'm going to add that debit in there. So plus 429,376.63. Now, that still gives me a negative number. So what that's doing is that's telling me that I am going to have a credit balance in my income summary. Okay, a credit balance of my in my income summary of 73,148.8. So to close income summary, I would need to debit for what I just got, that number, that 73,148.8. Okay, now that's one way to figure it out. Remember, we're closing our income summary. I'm also going to go to my income statement, and really this is the way that we can check our answer. Okay, I'm going to go down to my net income after federal income tax. And notice it shows me this number. Now, this should look familiar because that should be the number that we just calculated for our income summary. I would say what happens though is we need to know, do we debit or do we credit our income summary? Hopefully you remember the other account that we're going to use in this transaction, or in our closing entry is going to be our retained earnings. Now, if we think of this, our net income is going to help our retained earnings. So we are going to credit retained earnings. So I'm going to go ahead and go down here. I'm going to put in income summary, and I'm going to put in that number that I calculated, which is the same number as my net income. And then I'm going to credit my retained earnings. So what I would suggest doing is calculating what your income summary is. And remember what we did is we went to our income summary. There is our balance, which is a debit. I subtracted then my credit from my first closing entry, and then I added in my debit from my second closing entry. Okay. Once I did that, that gives me the same number. It also tells me where my balance is at with my income summary, if it's a debit or a credit. In this case, when I was calculating my income summary, it became a credit balance. And so that tells me to close income summary, I need to debit it. I then will double check with my income statement and make sure that the number I calculated equals what I have for a net income or a net loss. So it's important to remember this one could switch depending on if we have a net income or a net loss. Okay, I'm going to grade step 3. And I have one more step. My last closing entry then is to close my dividends account. And this is going to be a fairly easier transaction. So let's go ahead and just put in our date of the 31st. I would say what can be a little tricky, what I've seen students do in the past is we have this account that's called dividends payable. This is not the account that we are closing. We are closing our dividends account. And so make sure that you're paying attention to the correct account. So dividends has a debit balance. So to close that account, we would credit that account. We are going to debit our retained earnings for $12,000 and then credit our dividends to close that account. Okay, I'm going to grade my final step. And those are my 4 closing entries. You can now go on to 6-4 on your own.